Come on in, hit that like button, subscribe. Welcome to another episode of Focus Daily TV. In the last episode, we spoke about industrial bonds, bondsmen and bondswomen, and how that applied to biblical prophecy. And through legal instruments such as the Cesta QV Trust, the people were enslaved, bonded to the world of sin. Today we'll get a little bit more in depth in that. Around 1929, the early 30s, a new deal was formed by Franklin D. Roosevelt. This deal included social welfare. And these social welfare programs further entrenched us within the bonds that were placed upon us. Rather than continuing to depend on the Father, the God of the Bible, for our security and well-being, we turned to federal programs, welfare assistance programs, Social Security programs. And speaking of Social Securities, it's all spelled out in the acronym of the Canadian version of this program. Let's get a little bit into that. First, let's start with the New Deal. What is the New Deal? Excuse me. What was the New Deal in 1929? Roosevelt's New Deal aimed at promoting economic recovery and putting Americans back to work through social activism. New federal agencies attempted to control agricultural production, stabilize wages and prices, and create a vast public works program for unemployment. Simultaneously, around the 1920s, a stock market crash occurred, an intentional crash which aim was to destroy the old gold standard method of living where our money had true value and to replace it with this new fiat Cesta QV Trust form of living. And once the market crashed, people were in dire needs of economic recovery. Well, once again, rather than turning to the Lord, the Father, God, for our recovery, we bonded ourselves with social programs and social security numbers and birth certificates. Let's get into that. What are SSN and SIN? Sin. If you dread a future in which the country keeps tracks of their citizens with identification numbers rather than names, now think biblically as I read this. I'm not going to lay it out right now, but use your discernment. It's time to face the truth that the future is already here. The United States assigns citizens unique Social Security numbers, SSN, that keep track of taxes and benefits, and it has been done so for years. It is hardly alone. Many governments around the world revert to numbers to keep things organized. The number of men. For example, the country neighbor to the north, Canada, does the same thing. But Canada is a little bit more direct, and they call them social insurance numbers or SIN. So that social security number is literally bonding us into the world of sin. It's pretty much straightforward. So let's get into a little bit a video action and see how this thing all began.
The very beginning of the welfare system was the passage of the aid to dependent mothers early in the New Deal. And you know what? It was perfectly reasonable. What did they have in mind? Frances Perkins was Secretary of Labor at that time, and she had in mind widows. Widows with small children. And they needed help. What is a more natural object of our affection?
When the stock market...
So initially, they aimed it at the women and the children. They had more nefarious plans for the men. And when I speak of women, children, and men, I'm speaking of my people, the African American, the Afro-America, or whatever they label us as nowadays. These things were aimed intentionally at us to get us to turn to them once again, rather than relying on the Father, God, his commandment, his will, and his laws, which would have ensured us blessings. But we found ourselves as a people caught up in a curse.
crashed in 1929. The world entered the Great Depression. After his election in 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt instituted federal reforms to help the poor, including cash assistance.
Now keep in mind, people were made poor intentionally. And this Great Depression was a strategized attack on the spirit and souls of men.
For single mothers.
With 20% unemployment in America, massive public works projects strengthen families by providing employment in a difficult time.
I pledge myself to a new deal for the...
See, what I'm doing right now is giving a time frame of when the industrial bonds officially took place. All of this didn't happen a long time ago. All of this happened a couple of grandmothers ago, in the last 200 to 400 years. And within the last 200 to 400 years, that applies to biblical prophecy as well, which Focus Daily TV is here to point out. Hit that like button, subscribe, support the channel, hashtag Focus Daily TV.
To a new deal for the American people.
Roads, public parks, dams and bridges were built, tying work
We took the wrong deal, a deal with the other one.
directly to assistance. But even President Roosevelt realized that there was a limit to what the government could do.
President Roosevelt certainly said often that welfare was not intended to be for a lifetime and not intended to replace work. And to the extent that we've gotten away from that sentiment.
So what this social welfare program actually did was place debt on our bond, placed eternal debt due to the new monetary system with the gold standard coming out and fiat currency coming in. That fiat currency is represented as debt, and you can't use debt to pay off debt. So we got caught in a vicious cycle. Now, us individually didn't sign ourselves into these programs. Our parents did. However, like stated in the last episode, it goes from generation to generation. The curse that comes with relying on this federal demonic government rather than I don't mean to push up, because there ain't nothing up there. Kingdom of heaven is within. But it's just like habits. You know how it is. We should have been relying on the Father rather than, once again, the federal demonic government.
In some of our programs, that's unfortunate.
The lessons of history, confirmed by the evidence immediately before me, show conclusively that continued dependence upon relief induces a spiritual and moral disintegration, fundamentally destructive to the national fiber.
Truth in its purest form. Just pay attention to what he's saying. It's going to all play out.
To dole out relief in this way is to administer a narcotic, a subtle destroyer of the human spirit. We must preserve not only the bodies of the unemployed from destitution, but also their self-respect, their self-reliance, and courage, and determination.
It all started out so innocent.
Which were all ripped away from us. Our strength, our blessing from the Father, God of the Bible, was stripped away from us because, once again, our parents signed us up into these industrial bonds.
Innocently. And if I'd been alive then, I would have been in favor of it then. But it ratcheted up very slowly. Even by the end of the 1950s, the welfare rolls were small. The amounts of money were small. Welfare really was not, at that time, an attractive way to try to live.
Roosevelt remained true to his convictions and phased out emergency public projects as the economy improved. From the 1940s to the 1960s, poverty fell dramatically in the United States.
Dr. Drew and my wife Susan here, we want to show you.
All right, that's it for today. Hopefully you paid attention. More to come. But until next time, Focus Daily, y'all. Hit that like button, subscribe, support the channel. Focus Daily TV. And we out.